Good evening everyone and welcome to tonight's Executive Committee meeting. My name is Asjad Mahmood, I'm the Chairman of this committee. I will just do some short introductions going to my left.
Good evening everyone, so I'm Philip Spur, Director of Place.
I'm Karen Spencer, Director of Resources.
Sarah Whitwell, Head of Housing and Ramsar Health.
Councillor Dorothy Lord, representing Waterside and Horsfield, and Executive Lead for Community Safety.
Councillor Tom Whipp, I'm Councillor for Bonolosic Ward. I'm the Executive Member for Planning and Regulatory Services.
David Whipp, I'm a Councillor for Avian Courts, and I haven't got a little mascot for University Challenge, but I'm the Executive Lead on Resources.
Councillor Yvonne Tennant, representing Marsden and Southfield Ward.
Councillor Zafar Ali, representing Clover Clover Hill and Bradfield East, portfolio holder for Environment and Climate Change.
Mohammed Iqbal, Councillor in Bradley Ward, and responsible for housing, health and wellbeing.
Good evening, David Walker, Assistant Director for Operational Services. Peter Clark-Clarey, Head of Economic Growth.
Emma Louise Wells, Head of Finance.
Joanne Eckroth, Commission Administrator.
Howard Culshaw, Head of Legal and Democratic Services.
Want to introduce yourselves? Yeah, you're part of the team.
Okay, well thank you for that. I'm Ash Sutcliffe, Councillor for Waterside and Horsfield.
And Martin Stone, Councillor for Barrowford and Adelside.
Thank you very much. Can I welcome Karen Spencer, who has been with us since last month, but is the first Executive Committee meeting, so welcome to Pendlebury Council. Declarations of interest?
Chairman, there's an odd reference to Pembroke on one of the items. Can I declare an interest as a member of the board?
Sure. Same here. Item 2 is public question time. We have no members of the public.
Robbie?
No questions from you.
Minutes of the previous meeting.
Can I move those?
I'll second those. So the next item, I've got also some officers here, and I'll be asked if we can bring in Sarah next. So what we'll do, we'll look at environmental health and enforcement policy, which is item 9. So do you want to make any comments first, or just this members?
Would you like me to kind of introduce it? Or?
Can you introduce it?
Yes, certainly, yeah. So the environmental health enforcement policy has been refreshed following audit recommendations, following internal audits carried out last year. It's also been seen as an opportunity to make sure that it's encompassing all legislation within our remit. And it's also seeking to introduce changes around charging interest on works in default, and also changing how we apply VAT on any works carrying out in default. The rationale to these changes is basically to remove any financial advantage that's otherwise granted to those who are failing to comply with an enforcement notice issued by the Housing and Environmental Health team.
Yeah, Chairman, following on from Sarah, so the current policy was adopted about 5 years ago, and it was actually about 3 years ago. But obviously it's involving issues in health enforcement. Basically, it's now tidying up from the recommendations from the internal audit, back to the recommendations are set out.
Thank you. Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for Sarah, actually. The report on the second page states that the debt is secured through local land charges against properties. Is there no other form of enforcement, attachment of earnings, that sort of stuff? Is that not applicable in this sense?
I understand. In terms of kind of our legislation. There's several pieces of legislation that kind of state it can be applied to local land charge. The invoices are raised and passed to our sundry debtors team, and then are sent to the legal services department, which Howard can probably provide you with more information as to how it's recovered.
Chair, well, yeah, if he gets to the county court stage, then the normal county court enforcement methods are available, such as attachment to earnings or charging orders, yeah, depending on the size of the debt.
Just a supplementary, Chair, through you, and how successful are the other forms of enforcement? Or is there some more successful than others?
I don't have the data on that.
Fair enough.
That's fine. Thank you. Councillor Whip?
Thank you, Chairman. I asked a question earlier on about what the level of monies owed for work carried out in default was, and when the final report came through, my eyebrow twitched a bit because it's virtually £250,000. Now, I appreciate that the report says that the majority of this debt is secured through charges against the property. So, when the property is sold, that money is recovered. But if we think about the fact that interest hasn't been applied, and that some of these debts go back to 2007, we're looking at a huge reduction. Just think how much inflation has been recently. So the value of the works, if it was £10,000 in 2007, it might be something that would cost £20,000 or £30,000 now, and so we're not actually getting back the value of whatever was done. So I do agree with the proposal to introduce interest charges, and I would second the proposal from Councillor Iqbal.
Okay, all those in favour? Thank you. Next item is the disabled facilities grant policy. Sarah, do you want to?
So, the disabled facilities grant policies has been in place in its current format since I think January 22. So this report is requesting some revisions to the policy. Some of it is procedural changes to try and clear some bottlenecks in the system, to allow us to kind of manage the budget better. It's also to increase the amount of discretionary funding to provide an additional £10,000 per case in order to counter some of the increasing costs with delivering these grants. But there has been some further safeguards introduced around the discretionary funding, around placing it as a land charge on the property, so as to facilitate the grant going ahead, but providing some safeguards against the public spending.
Chairman, I think DFG policy has been discussed by councillors over a number of years, and some of us can go back to 20, 30 years ago when we always mentioned that Burnley Council, for example, in terms of DFG, was always, for some reason, well, we know the reason, but bizarrely has always got more funding than, for example, ourselves and other district councils in Lancashire. But as Sarah's alluded to, the cost of doing DFGs to those people that need them has escalated, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years. And even with the discretionary pot of 20,000, there might be some works that can't go ahead. One of the things I think that will be welcomed by colleagues around the table is that rather than somebody being on a waiting list for 6 months, 9 months or 12 months, and then having that financial assessment done to say, look, you've got a shortfall for argument's sake of 20, 30, 40,000 pounds, that assessment will be done up front by officers. And if, for example, there's a shortfall identified and the occupants say, well, there's no chance of us getting that money, clearly we've got an interest to protect the public purse to make sure that money is spent as quickly as possible. The county council have a discretionary fund, but it's quite difficult to access at the moment. I'm sure people will welcome the increase from 10 to 20,000, which will help certainly as some people in terms of getting the DFG done. But there are other things, for example, about modular building. So this is where officers are thinking outside the box to try and spread the jam as evenly as possible for people. But I think we have to be realistic that funding will never be enough for DFGs in Pendle. we need to try and help as many people as possible across the board. So in terms of the recommendations, I'd suggest that we adopt those.
Thank you for that. I'll happily second those proposals set out within this report. And again, I welcome the changes, because I think this will lead to improving quality of life for people and make lives comfortable that most need it. Councillor David.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Iqbal alluded to the iniquitous way in which the funding's distributed and the fact that residents in Pendle are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to disabled facilities grants. I know in the past 12 months we've been making strenuous efforts to try and get that revised, and it has been agreed that there will be some reviews. I wonder whether anybody can tell us if any of that work is bearing fruit, and whether we can actually see the prospect of fairer funding for DFGs and the prospect of people in Pendle being able to access the same or an equivalent level of funding as is available elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, personally as a leader of the council, as you're aware that I've discussed this at the district leaders meeting with county council leaders, political and officers there. We've taken the report that to review the formula which is out of date, and putting our case forward as strongly as possible. But because of the local elections, there haven't been any meetings held, and then the general election being called, the other district leaders meetings have been cancelled. So I'm hoping that in the next meetings in September, and then I will pick this up at that forum again and lobby as strong as possible. Councillor?
Yeah, I think just following on from David, in terms of the local district leaders having that lobby, I think what would be helpful now that we've got two new MPs in place in Pendle, whenever we decide to meet them together, I think this is something that needs to be on the agenda for them to push at a national level as well, to deal with this inequity that's affecting our residents more so than others.
Sure, that's a fair point. All those in favour? Thank you. Okay, the next item is the Town Deal Programme Capital Works to Pendle Wavelets.
I'll pick this up briefly, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update to Executive on investments being made at Pendle Wavelets Leisure Centre and seek consent to progress the development of an extension and other improvement works funded through the Nelson Town Deal Programme. As Executive will be aware, under the Healthy Town strand of the Town Deal Programme, there's about £1.7 million worth of funding allocated to support improvement works at Pendle Wavelengths, to be matched by about £500,000 of additional investment. The original Town Deal proposal is set out in paragraph 5 of the report, and that proposal includes new studio space, gym and breakout areas, and new water features to the Wavelengths Beach area. This original Town Deal proposal has not been progressed. There have been a number of reviews of leisure provision undertaken, so the original scheme has not been progressed. But with inflation, the original scheme is now costed at around about £2.8 million, which means that it's not affordable within the current funding envelope. So officers have been working up a revised scheme, which can deliver within the funding envelope, which can be completed by March 2026, which is the timeline to spend Town Deal funding, and which can deliver the required scheme outputs, and those outputs set out at paragraph 18 of the report. So we propose a revised scheme set out at paragraph 26, so a slightly small extension to the leisure centre, improvements to showers, changing areas, the provision of a smart gaming wall, and other improvements to the beach and water features. Officers believe this scheme is deliverable, it's affordable within the Town Deal funding envelope, and will generate the benefits which we need to actually develop and deliver as part of the Town Deal programme. So again, Executive, we've updated you on the improvement works and investments in Pendle Wavelengths, but the core purpose of the report is to seek your consent to progress the Town Deal improvement scheme for the Leisure Centre. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Philip. Very detailed information there. Like Philip says, within the town deal, because of the issues with match funding and also the cost of the building have increased significantly over the last 2 to 3 years. So, you know, with the proposals, there will be improvement to the changing rooms, the leisure pool, the beach area. There'll be a new studio built, and this will be all affordable and deliverable. And the footfall will increase in the region for 85,000. This will be cost neutral. It will bring extra people into the town, and hopefully with all the other town centre regeneration programmes that are going on, these will complement each other. So this model, as Philip says, will work. It's deliverable, it's affordable, so I move the recommendations as set out. Councillor Whip?
I'm not going to second it, Chairman. So you might want to seek a seconder. But I want to look at this in a different way. And I think there are various factors that have changed since the original bid was put in, which supported the £1.7 million of investment from the town deal money. And I think the fundamental change is that this council is being told by officers, by external consultants, by the Conservative group on the council, that we cannot afford to keep the leisure centres, the sports centres that we have got. Now, I think in terms of that, there are two aspects. The first one is, given that the fundamental finances have changed, that we ought to be going back to what is now the Ministry of Communities and Local Government. Sorry, it's changed, so I haven't got it right in my head yet. But we ought to be going back to government and saying, well, look, you know, it'll be an achievement to retain that centre, Wavelengths, in Nelson. And the reality is that this council is faced with a stark choice of having leisure facilities or not having leisure facilities. So the funding could be put in to make Wavelengths more sustainable, and therefore the output is the retention of the centre. Now, clearly that doesn't fit with the rules that we've currently got to abide to, but that's not to say that those rules could not be adjusted. And certainly there is a new government in place, and they would surely have the foresight to recognise that things have changed, and you know, we could do something different. So what I think we ought to be doing, and my group has discussed this, and we've discussed it between ourselves previously, is that we ought to use any investment to make the centre more financially sustainable, and that we look at some of the energy saving measures that are documented in the report, which have been as a consequence of the previous work that we've done. We look at how we can run the centre at less cost, and the investment is directed in that way rather than extending the centre to have new facilities. And although the consultants, I think it's Strategic Leisure, have said that you know, it will be neutral in terms of cost, I've seen previous studies of strategic leisure, where other facilities, I won't mention too many of them, but urban altitude, the higher ups at Colne, inside Spa at Nelson, where they were saying, oh, well, these will make money, and they didn't. So I think, Chair, I am a little bit sceptical about the consultants coming along and saying, you know, it'll bring in money. I just pose that question mark, really. So I think that's one strand of it. The fundamentals have changed, that we ought to be looking, if we're going to invest any money, that we invest money in order to invest to save, essentially, so that the centres are costing less money in the future. Secondly, I referred to the question mark that there is over the 3 leisure centres, one in West Graven, one in Colne, and this one in Nelson. And we will be having a report at our meeting in September where we look at the operational management of those centres. There's clearly a push from officers, as evidenced at our last meeting, clearly a push from the Conservative group for one of the swimming pools to close. And I think it would be wrong to make a decision in terms of wavelengths which prejudges the outcome of any decisions that might be taken during the executive meeting and the council meeting in September. So, as you know, I am committed and working very hard to try and keep all 3 centres running. I think in order to do so, we need to find less expensive ways of operating them, and if we have got this finance available, we ought to be putting it into the work, the measures that will make wavelengths cheaper to run, rather than extending it and potentially making it more expensive to operate, and certainly not actually reducing the cost of operation. My final point, Chair, is about cohesion, because every week there is a news story. Do you want a pump track in Marsden Park? We've got a new play area in this park. Pendle Rise is being acquired. The reaction to that in the rest of the borough is quite hostile. And I know full well that this is a consequence of the government, the previous government, awarding funding in a rather unfortunate way, which means that Nelson gets the town deal funding, Nelson gets the 20 million for the extended town deal, and people outside local government circles do not distinguish where the funding is coming from. So if Pendle Council is seen to be investing this money in wavelengths prior to making any decisions on the future of leisure centres elsewhere in the borough, and we're not actually, if we go ahead as is set out in this report, and we're not making it more sustainable for the future, that is adding to the council's costs and the consequential strain on the overall budget into the future, which affects every resident of Pendle, and has that cost in terms of cohesion as well. So for all those reasons, I urge the executive not to follow the recommendation in this report, but to actually resolve to go back to the Department for Community and Local Government, whatever its new name is, and say, look, circumstances have changed. we can't afford to operate these centres, we don't want to add to costs. Please, can we use that funding to allow them to be run, allow this centre to be run cheaper? And I think that then helps the overall Pendle Council budget, and it helps in terms of that equity between the different townships across the borough. So I would move as an alternative proposal that we do seek that new deal for Nelson, which would amend the outcomes to be achieved. And I think the outcome to be achieved is keeping wavelengths open.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I mean, just in relation to one of the final points you talked on, I mean, in Pendle we've had millions of pounds of investment, especially in the two big towns, Colne and Nelson, and we are seeing the results in Colne with the Colne Muni opening very soon. We've got the Hippodrome that's ready. I think they're doing some official opening within the next couple of months. We've got the Lesser Muni that's ready, and also the Colne Market. Lesser Theatre, yeah. So you've got Colne Market Hall, that's taking a major part of the town centre regeneration. Millions of pounds being invested, with potential of housing adjacent to that site, and also having apartments on top of that potentially. So there is a lot of money that's coming into Pendle, and we've got to think of the bigger picture more strategically at Pendle as a whole. We've had in West Craven, we've got the approximately £150,000 of investment with the swimming pool side of things. So there is money coming in, and I think, yeah, okay, you know, I can understand where David is coming from, but there is, it's to some extent, it's fairly distributed in that sense. In relation to the main point that David was talking about, I think timescale wise, you know, there's very strict timescales that we've got to adhere to. This money has to be spent by March 2026, and it's crucial. And that's the Town Deal Board has been on our case, if you will. They've been asking for direction from the council, you know, because of just the way the figures haven't been stacking up there. So I think it's very important that we make a decision, give that's the Town Deal Board a clear direction, so they can move forward and deliver this project within the time frame and within the budget, which is affordable and deliverable.
Chairman, just a few points. Before I speak, I'll second what you moved. I mean, the fact is, if you go to anybody in Balmoral, they'll say that all the money's being spent in Nelson and Colne. You go to somebody in Colne and they'll say everything's being spent in Barwick and Nelson people will say, well, everything's spent in Balmoral. We're never going to please people. Well, the fact is that, I mean, in terms of this money, I mean, I was on the Town Deal Board, and the Town Deal Board, I think, starts to lose patience with the council in terms of not actually making decisions. Whilst I know what David said in terms of going back to government and saying, look, the landscape has changed, and give us that flexibility. I think the reality is, if we're being honest, that, you know, we've got a new government in place, and I don't think from what I'm seeing is that things like this will be a high priority for them. They're looking for the big ticket items at the moment to try and address, correct some of the wrongs of the last 14 years. You know, Philip has said in his introduction that this money has to be spent by March 2026. And I think if we keep delaying to wait for government, they might ultimately become, because, for example, Angela Rayner has announced certain projects were being axed, and I generally had a concern when I was reading that, to think that some of the additional funding that has come into Pendle on one-off projects like the 20 million recently that was announced for Nelson, that things like that would go. And I think if we go back to government, they could quite legitimately turn around and say, well, okay, then if you can't make your minds up, we'll pull the plug on the Town Deal Board, and I think people will not forgive us for that. So whilst I agree with the sentiments that David is saying, is that we need to go to government to say, look, the landscape has changed, I think in terms of this we need to make a decision, because I'm disappointed that the scheme has had to be scaled back. I understand why. You know, people have had aspirations for the last 2 years to get things done, but for whatever reason we've not been able to, and I think we need to make that decision tonight, move on with this. But if in the meantime the government come back and say, we'll address some of the inequalities that have been created over the last decade, all good and well, but the money that we've got, we need to spend it and get spending it quickly. So I'm happy to second what you moved.
Thank you. Councillor Zaffarali?
Thank you, Leader. I certainly hear Councillor Whip's remarks, and it's not the first time he's made the remarks. And yes, they have substance, but ultimately that decision is probably outside of our hands in terms of where funding goes. Yes, we can all influence our MPs and the various different departments that are responsible for making these decisions. But as Councillor Iqbal has just pointed out, the Town Deal Board has been working on this for several years now. We've had a change in personnel, change in officers, and really we're at the point now where we certainly, as it's pointed out in the report, we certainly are at risk of losing this funding. And I don't think no argument, in my view, stacks up in losing 1.7 million, as it states in the report. And I'm all for this investment finally being delivered. I think it's really important for the people of Nelson, and of course not just Nelson, but people from across the borough who come to Pendle Wavelengths. In fact, the numbers I remember seeing when the town council, Nelson Town Council that is, used to get reports, because we funded around £7,000 to £11,000 per annum for free swimming at Wavelengths. And the reports we used to get back from PLT was always positive, in terms of users, not just from Nelson, but from across the borough. So this is funding that's going to reach the borough wide. And as Councillor Whip has quite rightly pointed out, whilst it is Nelson Town funding, I think the benefits of this will still reach members across the borough, not just Nelson. So I'm more than happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you. I think the key thing is this is cost neutral at this stage, in the first year or so, but then after a year or two, it could potentially be generating income which will help Pendle Leisure Trust as a whole. Councillor Tom Whip.
Thank you very much, Chair, for letting me speak on this item. The famous words of the new Chancellor were, "If you can't afford it, you can't have it." She said that quite a few times in her speech on the budget issues. I think the outcomes that this is trying to achieve are very good. I think the integration with the Nelson Town deal is a good one. I think the relationship between the leisure centre and how well the town centre is doing is a positive link, and if one does well, the other does well. But we also need to be heavily aware that if we can't have the revenue situation sorted, the facility might have to be mothballed, it might have to go. And I don't think any of us here wants to see that. We've got a narrow window here where we have an opportunity to go to government, to go to our new MPs to lobby on our behalf in government and see if there's a possibility of the outcomes being adjusted so that some of this work can be refunneled into cost-saving measures. I think the window is narrow, and I'm fully appreciative of the March 2026 deadline for those works being carried out. And that's why I think any looking into those discussions needs to be of a tight time scale, and we need to put a date on it if that's where we're going forwards with at this meeting today. I mean, my suggestion would be the council meeting in September. If we're not hearing back before then, this is the de facto way forward, because I think we should not be letting it slip away from us. And I fully agree that a lot of people have been putting the backs behind this, wanting to get it done. So while I support what's proposed here, I think what Councillor David Whip says needs to be our strategic outcome for anything this council does in the near future. And we need to be lobbying our new ministers, lobbying our new MPs to try and get things changed to make that happen. I'd probably ask Philip if that delay to September would be throwing this out or whether that's achievable. But I think it's definitely worth asking the question to the department that oversees this. So I will second Councillor David Whip's amendment.
Through yourself, Chair, just to answer Councillor Whip's question first of all. It is an incredibly tight programme already. Could we live with a 6-week delay? We probably could. in all honesty, but it makes what's already a very tight programme even tighter. Just one point of clarity, Chair, if I may, very, very quickly. Just in terms of the revenue implications of the proposed scheme, the income and the costs have actually been assessed by PLT. So, and there are no guarantees, but just to actually clarify for members that it's PLT's numbers we're looking at here, not through external consultants. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Leader. I have a question, if I can, I'll go through you to Mr. Spur, but I did want to clear Councillor Whip's comments. He made a couple of references to the Conservative position. The Conservative position is that we would ideally like to keep all three leisure centres open. Of course we would. All of us would. However, the administration made that decision to keep three open. All we ask is, how is that going to be affordable? And that is what we are still awaiting an answer on. Councillor Iqbal rightly pointed out that we should be welcoming all inward investment into Pendle, and that we're all Pendle councillors, and we seek to act in the interests of residents. And it seems to me that this is, of course it's not an ideal situation, however we must welcome that funding and use it in a way that is appropriate. I notice as well the reference to the synergy with Pendle Rise Development, and that was referenced earlier. I think this is a very important point. I note also that there are time constraints around the use and utilisation of this funding, and Councillor Whip talked about a strategic review. It seems to me we haven't got time for a strategic review. We need to move ahead now along the lines outlined in the paper. My question, Leader, for Mr. Spur, in paragraph 18 of your paper you reference the calculated additional visits of about 107,000, and in paragraph 19 you note that Pendle has until 2029 to show the town deal key outputs are being met. My questions are around the extra visits, how confident are we in those? And secondly, the implications of paragraph 19, is there any potential clawback in terms of the funding if the outcomes are not realised?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, through yourself, Chair. In terms of delivering the outputs, the scheme has been worked up in close concert with PLT, who kind of do this job, manage facilities day in, day out. So they are confident that these outputs can be achieved, and I'm taking their confidence as a very kind of strong indicator we can actually do that. If the outputs are not achieved, there is always, Councillor Stone, a risk of clawback. Sitting here today, I'm not able to actually say whether it will definitely happen or definitely not happen. But we have been given money. Quite bluntly, the government is buying certain outputs from that investment. They are expecting and wish to see those outputs, and I'm sure there'll be quite serious questions if those outputs are not delivered. The consequence of those questions I'm not able to say sitting here this evening.
Thank you, Philip. So we have an amendment to the all those in favour of the amendment? All those against? So that's lost. And we have the original proposal to go with the original recommendation of the report. All those in favour? All those against? So that's carried. Okay, so the next item is Cole, AD and Barnoldswick master plans. So these are long-term projects which will guide regeneration for the next 15 years. They will create a vision for each individual town. They will focus on employment opportunities, retail, leisure, housing, healthcare, community facilities, and also in the protection of the natural environment. Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to preface this the report outlines its purpose, and it says to consider the completed master plans and formal adoption. I think these master plans shouldn't be considered completed. We need to think of them as living documents, and you know, they provide a basis of what we can do going forward, but they're by no means the end product of this process. I just read through the Colne, I've read through the Bonalswick and Aby master plans as well, and you know, they've got some solid suggestions backed up by the consultation processes that you know we can work on as a council with our partners in the county council, town councils, etc., etc. But they're not by any means an extensive list of what could be done. And I think if we're going to adopt these, we need to outline a process by which they are continually updated, added to, and implemented. One of the at the end of the report, it goes into the financing and the development of the delivery of the outcomes it's trying to achieve. One of those is suggesting priority actions, agreed working groups created to go through the suggestions and try and actually action them in the short, medium, long term. And I think we need a clear way forward to use those, otherwise these are just bits of paper. I mean, we've had master plans in Briarfield, in Colne, and they've just sat on a shelf and nothing great has come out of those. And it was just an exercise completed for the sake of having one on a shelf. So I need to have some assurances from through you, Chair Ifti, about the way that these will be used moving forwards, how we can get our partners in Lancashire County Council and the town councils engaged with the proposed schemes within these to actually get some action on even just the easily achievable parts proposed in the master plan documents. Because, I mean, my experience at Bonalswick is the county council is a limp arm and they won't help. You know, they have a full resurfacing scheme and you say, well, we've got this idea to extend the pavements, improve crossing points. No, we're just going to resurface it exactly as it was. And, well, what's the point of a master plan if, you know, they're having a resurface scheme and they're not implementing the new proposals? So we need that clear way forward, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor?
Yeah, and I was more or less going to say what Councillor Whipper said about the master plan, and I remember the last master plan in Colne, I think, I'm trying to work out, was it about 20 years ago? I can't remember now. It was quite some time ago, and you know, people were so excited about it, especially in the waterside, and absolutely nothing happened. So, you know, I think we're quite right to be a little bit worried about this. You know, will this be another master plan sat on a shelf somewhere? So that's my worry, same as Tom and I presume David. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor David Whip?
Thank you, Chairman. Echo the comments. My first concern with these so-called master plans is that they are not comprehensive. And it says on the front of them, and this is a previous version, but it says Bonalswick master plan, Aby master plan, Colne master plan. And there are no such things. The scope of the areas that have been considered and the scope of the work hasn't been inclusive of the entirety of those townships. And I'll quote Bonalswick as an example where one of the major employers in the town, Rolls-Royce, is in the process of consolidating its operation currently on 2 sites into half of one site, and is knocking half of one site down. Now, in terms of a master plan for the town, that is so significant in terms of the jobs that there will be there, the space that will be left in terms of where factories have been knocked down, that, you know, those are huge considerations that in any proper master plan that would be right up there as some of the factors that you need to take into account. Not a dicky bird. No consideration of those because it's outside the red line. Now, I think that they could legitimately to be a sort of town centre master plan for Colne, Bonalswick and Earby, and there'd be some legitimacy with that, but in no shape or form are they that wider plan for those townships. So they're not comprehensive. I think, Chair, and you know, I've had a lot of input in terms of the two in West Craven, and you know, trying to get changes, some of which have been achieved, others not quite so successful. But there's some worthwhile stuff in here. There's some stuff that I'm personally not as keen on, but you know, so be it. But what there isn't is any funding. Now, you know, we've touched on funding in terms of the discussion we had about wavelengths and the town deal, and you were saying, well, we're getting millions for this and millions for that, millions for the other. In terms of Colne, I think in terms of what was aimed at happening with the market hall, you know, the figure was missing a digit. It should have been at least 16.5 million rather than 6.5 million. Put that to one side. There aren't any millions for these documents. No million, I can't hold all three up. There's nothing, absolutely nothing. So the first thing is we need to get some funding. And I'm not clear where that funding is going to come from. We have seen elsewhere in the county, Lancashire County Council putting funding in, Clitheroe, which we share the constituency with Clitheroe. During the general election, you know, I saw the work that was going on there, which was a partnership between Ribble Valley Borough Council and Lancashire County Council. Where is the funding coming from Lancashire County Council towards the work that we want to see done in Earby? A couple of years ago there was a promise of funding, and then when we got some funding together, the County Council money was pulled. No funding coming from the County Council, and in a lot of cases they're turning around and saying, well, if you want to put some different surfaces down there, you've got to give us extra money so that, you know, like we can look after that in future. So, you know, they have the bun and the halfpenny, or at least they don't provide any funding and then they take it off you. So we're failing in that respect. With, you know, as far as I could see, there is no prospect, no promises from the County Council to put any funding into it. There is some funding available through the Levelling Up Fund, 50 million for East Lancashire. Looking at those proposals the other day, not a single penny piece for West Craven, nothing for Earby or Bonalswick. £50 million for East Lancashire, we're left out in the cold. Is there anything to put anything into these proposals? No. So, Chairman, I think we need to have something in about funding. public realm, because it does feature quite heavily in these, is, I think, something that we look toward Lancashire County Council to get carried out. The other thing that these documents, to a greater or lesser degree, highlights are some of the, I'm going to call them grot spots. I think, you know, they might be called opportunities in here in some sort of euphemistic way, but essentially the grot spots. And in the past, I know as a council that, you know, we've seized the opportunity, put CPOs on properties, done something with them, or done a back-to-back, you know, transfer them to other people who have transformed those grot spots. So I think there's an incumbency on Pendle Council to be prepared to work on perhaps CPOs or other mechanisms in order to deal with some of the issues that are highlighted. And then I think, Chair, we've got to come to what Councillor Tomwick was saying about a mechanism to drive things forward. And I think that you know, we need to have area committees and town councils actively working together in order to implement whatever we can out of these recommendations. So I would propose that we do adopt these town centre, I'm going to call them town centre master plans. So we do adopt these town centre master plans. That secondly, we recommend that the council resolves to seek funding in order to implement recommendations within the master plans. That specifically Lancashire County Council is requested to fund public realm work. Further, that the full council is recommended to agree that compulsory purchase order powers are used in appropriate circumstances in order to take these in forward. And then finally, that we ask that area committees and respective town councils form working groups in order to take recommendations forward. So adding to the first recommendation on the agenda paper, adding those things in so as to have some sorts of mechanism in order to actually get something out of this. Else, what I fear is that there have been 2 years of people's time wasted, because we will see no change, no difference, no improvements as a consequence of the work that's been done.
Thank you. I mean, I fully support what's been recommended, and it's a very valuable, detailed report. I think I totally agree with what Councillor Tomwick said about, you know, this is a living document. You know, we've got to take that on board. Things change over time. You know, extensive consultation did take place over many months, and you know, we've got to work with our partners to deliver what's within this strategic document. So fully support the master plans, and hopefully this again will improve the quality of life for people that live within the area. Councillor Haller.
Thank you, Leader. I echo colleagues' comments on the report. I'm just, however, mindful that paragraph 7, it refers to Briarfield, and I don't want to take it away from the main agenda item, but I think it's important that I do mention Briarfield, with the Briarfield East hat on. You know, it's had a vision document since 2016, so I'm mindful that that's nearly 10 years now. And whilst Leader was fully appreciative of the efforts of officers and partners in the multi-million-pound project down at North Line, I still think it's important. There's so many challenges in Briarfield, and I know IFT's here tonight, but, you know, there is some UK SPF funding going in to Bridefield, but I still think it's really important that we review that vision document and look at the forward planning nature of Bridefield. I just want to put that out there for officers to hopefully pick up in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sutcliffe?
Thank you. I feel sorry that people can't be more optimistic and excited about these master plans, to be honest. I think IFTI and the team have done a great job in pulling these ideas together, and I think that's the point. These are ideas. The master plan is about ideas, things for the future, and then it is incumbent on all of us in this room, as officers and councillors, to work on projects to bring in funding to make these things happen. And as Councillor Tom Webb said, it's a living document, completely agree. It should always evolve, it should always change. And it's, as I say, it's important for us all to work on those things together. Even in draft form, councillors, I know, are out actively seeking agreements with landowners, trying to find out who owns what can be delivered, with who, and with whom. You can, you know, so we can actually hit the ground running once these things are live and get that funding in. In terms of the Lancashire County Council contributions, there are 2 projects in Colne that are actively being delivered. One of them inside of the master plan area, which is the Postal Service Improvement Plan, and the other one which is outside, which is under the level of £50 million active travel plan. So these things are happening. They have to be lobbied for, but see it as something exciting. It's a really exciting prospect across Pendle. So, you know, get out there, lobby for the funding, find the pots of money, and let's get it delivered.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say, I'm not trying to be negative. I think pragmatic is probably my feelings on these. I think they can be very effective in the right hands, and you can get a lot of positive outcomes from a master plan. However, I think the experience of them in the past, as well as looking at other councils across the Northwest that I've sort of seen, and I've actually read quite a couple of master plans for my sins. It needs an active push to keep them on the agenda. They don't just work if you just have them, because, you know, people don't stumble across a master plan. They've got to go searching for it. And, you know, if you've got a change in you know, political administration at a council, that sort of front of your mind thinking about these ideas, it slips away from you. You don't get that continuity. So it's important we have structures in place just to keep them at the forefront of our minds whenever we think about this sort of thing. And yeah, I'm glad to hear Colne's got some movement there, and congratulate people involved in that. We just need to see that happen elsewhere. And yeah, I mean, it's good to bring up the Bridefield. I think maybe, you know, they should have the same working group set up as what we're doing, and to bring those documents back to the forefront of what they're working on, and to have people actually look at them again. Because I can guarantee a lot of people on Brianfield Town Council, they've probably never looked at the document, especially if they've been elected, you know, very recently. So I think that's a very important thing to come back. Could I just ask through you, Chair, to IFTI, what the current plans were around, you know, the outcomes, the delivery section of these documents? What steps are you taking next beyond what we're suggesting, Councillor David Whipp's motion? Sorry, just before you start, I'll just say I'll second the motion.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, through the Chair. Once these plans have been adopted, at the moment we are looking for quick wins, short-term wins, where we can actually get some investment in for things like the town centre signage, maybe some footpath improvements, elements of that which we can actually readily get from Lancashire County Council, perhaps through LUF funding, and we're looking at all these opportunities at this moment in time. So Philip and I have had a discussion, and we're trying to set out a programme of works for each one of those town centres, so we can go back to the area committees and say within this period of time, this is what we're prioritising. Do we have buy-in from the community to enable us then to apply for funding to enable that then to be rolled out? So we're taking this quite seriously. We've heard what colleagues have said behind the Nelson town plans and the Bridefield ones in the past. What we're trying to do is have a slightly different approach. So as soon as this is adopted, I'll set out a programme of short-term, medium-term and long-term plans, and then come back to each of the area committees with this is what we're proposing to do, and maybe a cocktail of funding that might help support that.
Thank you.
Just one final thing, Chair, before we move on. I just want to say that I think the most important thing with these documents is they already have a history of high quality consulting behind them, backing them. I think a lot of things you run into when you're working with the county council trying to make improvements is, they say you've got to do consultation after consultation after consultation. Well, this has already happened here. But we need to get the county council to recognise that. And I think that's something we, maybe officer to officer, this council could work on.
Sure. I totally agree. And these master plans, they kind of give us the vision to work towards. I think now we have all that fine detail, and I'm sure over the next couple of years we can, probably even sooner than that, where we go and attract all that kind of funding wherever it's available and bring that investment to make the improvements that's required and to deliver the outcomes. So all those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Next item is the cemetery extensions.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I know David's here, and I know he's been waiting patiently, so I'm more than happy for David.
Sorry, David, did you want to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair.
So this report follows on from the Cemeteries report we presented to members in June of last year. Members at the time agreed to the suspension of pre-purchasing of burial plots and several of the recommendations covering the investigation of possible use of tenure-owned land and the use of transfer lands for burials. The report at the time advised that we had between 3 and 9 years of space in the larger cemetery sites and 40 years space at Salford. So this report builds upon that and sets out the positions of today. Agreed to complete further investigations work in each of the sites to identify additional burial plots, and with the pre-purchasing of burial plots being suspended within the cemeteries, we're now reporting a lifespan of between 5 and 17 years for the larger burial sites. 40 years still remains for Salford. So following on from the June report, initial testing has taken place, and that proved quite positive in most of the sites that we tested. Barrowford is yet to be assessed, and we arranged that for later in August. But the assessment at Gill Cemetery wasn't as positive as it was in the other sites. Only one of the 5 locations tested showed that it had potential for burials. The area identified could create approximately 304 burial plots if fully developed. So to investigate the extent of the area, we would use further investigation is recommended. The costs that we've been given are around £30,000 for that investigation work to be carried out. The Council has already set aside £79,000 over a 4-year programme, and the additional works could be funded from what remains of the £79,000 that we're already using. But there is a risk that the remaining budget will not be sufficient to cover the costs of the additional works, and then the remaining surveys remaining is possibly needed to get planning through to planning stages. So the report sets out the potential income for the site from 304 burial plots as created, and it doesn't show that there is also an income of roughly around £9,000 each year from memorials and other items of that nature. So the recommendation within the report for officers is that to pursue this further, the members agreed to additional funding of £30,000 to allow that additional surveying work to be completed and give us a true picture of whether Gill Cemetery can be used for an extended lifespan.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Leader, and thank you, David, for the very succinct briefing. I think it's blatantly obvious as to what we should be doing here. I think overall, the change in policy and the investigative works, the positive outcomes of the investigative work at the various different cemeteries has set up Pendle quite nicely, I think, in terms of making sure that we've got sufficient burial plots for the foreseeable future. So I welcome the report and the findings of those investigative outcomes. Insofar as Gill Cemetery is concerned, I'm hoping colleagues will support the recommendation in terms of the additional income or the funding that's been requested. On page 3, for example, should we be successful with a positive outcome from this additional works and the overall extension of the Guild Cemetery. You know, we're looking at somewhere in the year of 15 years lifespan being increased for the particular cemetery in question, and bringing in just over £500,000 over a 10-year calculation. So I think it's blatantly obvious this £30,000 is speculating to accumulate, and I think it'll mean that should we be successful in this speculate, I'd refer to it as speculation. I'm sure it's more positive than that, but I do urge colleagues to support the recommendation. I'm happy to move the recommendation, Leader.
Thank you.
Second that.
All right, David. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item. Thank you, David. Next item is the revenue capital outturn for 2023-24.
So,
Introduce it or make any comments?
Gemma Louise is going to introduce that for me, as she's a bit far closer to it than me this time.
Sure, fine. So Gemma Louise,
Okay, so this report sets out the revenue and capital provisional outturn for 24-24. Councillors should be aware that at this present time the statement of accounts for 22-23 has not been signed off and is still open with the auditors. And that's the main reason why this is a provisional outturn and not the final one. The recommendations provided here are to note the provisional outturns of both revenue and capital. We're proposing a slippage of just over £300,000 between the year of 23-24 and into 24-25. It should be noted that a good proportion of that figure is for area committees. Councillors will remember during the year 22-23 area committee funding budgets were moved from within the capital programme and into the revenue pot. This allows continuation of projects that area committees have committed to that span more than 1 year. Also recommended is that we approve the proposal to split capital budget, £12 million, from the same years, and that the revised capital programme for 24-25 is approved as well. I'll just bring your attention to the tables that are contained here. So table number 1 is showing the provisional outturn. This is by department with the current variance and then external grant retained. During 22-23 we also set up a provision, a reserve that holds revenue funding that is external and has to be spent on certain areas. So that's automatically held over, leaving us with an underspend across the net cost of service of around £80,000. You'll note there's some larger variances which I'm happy to discuss if you want to now, or I can keep going. Also laid out in Appendix A is a more detailed version of those figures. Once the approval of slippage is given, this would push the outturn into an overspend of £246,000. This obviously has impact on the reserves drawdown. The drawdown net is £500,000. This is because we're adding slippage into the grant reserve. The grant reserve at the end of 22-23 stood at £1 million. At the end of this period it will stand at £1.7 million. So the figure noted in point 18 of £9.5 million reserves, it should be noted 1.7 of this cannot be spent as we wish, it has to be spent under the grant terms. In point 17 you'll see the movements in the reserves, obviously some up and some down. And then in table 2, more detail about the capital programme, and then in Appendix C, again, a further breakdown of the projects held within the capital programme and the proposed slippage of £12 million there. Also noted are some of the higher level projects in capital and where they're up to, which councillors will recognise, and the implications of the financials are all held within the report.
Thank you, Gemma Louise. Councillor Greenwood.
Thank you, Chair. In amongst there, Gemma Louise referred to the previous year's statement of accounts not being signed off yet, and I wonder whether Gemma Louise or Karen is able to tell the executive, what the expected timescale is for that. I understand what some of the issues are, but it might be a wider audience.
I'm happy to, Chair. Yes, so there's one final calculation that the auditors have asked us to review. It's to do with the capital financing requirements. The way they calculate it and the way we've historically calculated it do not match up. We did some work with a Treasury advisor, Link, who were noted in the next report last year, but this did not appease the auditors' views. So further work today, we've come a lot closer. It is the last figure that they want amending, and so I'm hopeful that during next week I'll be sending them the final draft, so it will be able to be signed off at the next Accounts and Audit Committee.
Okay, so once we get to a straight edge with that then flows through into the immediate financial, which we're looking at today. So are we going to get to a point before we start work in earnest on future years' budgets that we know where we are?
Yes, I would hope so. So substantially, the majority of the work for the accounts for 23-24 have been done. The last parts are really incumbent on myself to do, so the capital assets and the depreciation thereof, and some of the further work that continues from the changes that Bank Thornton have asked for in 22-23. So as much as is possible, I would like to have a draft accounts ready for the auditors who are planning to come at the end of September.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the use of reserves, just to draw Gemma Louise out on this, paragraph 6, it says the drawdown of reserves is 593.
Yeah.
And then if you look at paragraph 17, it says the net drawdown is 288. Now, Gemma Louise referred to an extra £700,000 going into the reserve for grants, and I just can't make the figures add up in my head. Maybe I need a piece of paper or a spreadsheet, but I'm just wondering whether we could have further elucidation of what the reserve position is. And although there's reference in the report to the total reserves on paragraph 18, we don't have a schedule that actually says this and that and the other. So I wonder whether we could just have a short explanation of the reserves. Addition, deletion, use of and whatever.
Yeah, so the use of is all laid out there in points A to I. That is the only changes in the reserve in the year. There was presented to Council in February a proposed change to the reserve, which was more to merge and cancel out some. That was accepted, and so that will be fulfilled, but there was no net impact of that. It was merely to delete those that were no longer needed under old names and to merge into use the things that are used for the same thing. So yeah, the grants income is what pushed us into a reduce what we needed to draw down, because obviously we're adding more in, but it's not actual additions to our reserve. So the overall balance For the beginning of the period, I think I've noted here, if I've not, I ought to have done. The beginning of the period, the reserves balance was 9.9 million and will be 9.5 million. So additional grants have, you know, the net is still a reduction in our main reserves, and 1.7, as I say, can't be used by us at our discretion.
And Chair, just to get the final bit out here, as I recollect, the budget envisaged the use of £715,000 of reserves or thereabouts. So we've actually only used half the amount, approximately half the amount than what was budgeted for at the beginning of the year. Yeah. Okay, thank you. One small question in terms of, well, maybe two, but on the capital programme, I note the proposed capital programme Appendix F includes the line for EB flood work, of which we've got external funding, we've got £200,000, we use a little bit of it, and then we're aiming to get £2.5 million for further grant assistance towards that, which is in the capital programme. But on the previous sheet, which is capital programme 23-24, if I look at the line for flood prevention work, EAB, we've got 49,882. Sorry, I'd have to get my magnifying glass out for these numbers. And then there's an in-year adjustment, and then that funding disappears. So what's happened with that, please?
Can I just have a look at the line? This is not something...
It's in regeneration, 49882.
I think that it's a separate works that have been done without funding, by the look of it, because that 2.5 million is not in yet, and it wasn't within the 200 grand works plan. So we're slipping £136,000 that is to be an initial plan, and these are, by the look of it, seem to be additional work.
Sorry, you're looking at levelling up fund com 136,484.
That's on line with flood alleviation.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it was the one below.
No, the com levelling up slip is 1.8 million. Sorry, it is very tiny.
No, sorry, Jen Louise. Flood prevention works EAB. It ends up with slippage, nothing, and a in-year adjustment for 9882.
That's flood prevention works.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the flood alleviation is the one where we've got the funding.
Yes, I'm wondering where that best part of £50,000 has gone.
Yeah.
Because the works that have been carried out were fully funded from Grant in Aid and ESF.
So that wasn't our understanding from the detail of the work, so we can...
We had change, and I'm just wondering where the change has gone.
So it may be a change that is needed in the slippage. So I will send you details if that would help.
Yeah, so Chair, with the proviso that we actually look at that detail, can I move this report? And thank Gemma Louise for her endeavours, and commiserate with Karen taking on the task. You know, given the propensity of councillors not to do the sensible thing when it comes to financing, we'll have to have his work put out in future.
Thank you. You can share that with all the members. That'd be great. Councillor Torrey.
Thank you, Chair. At the last full council, we had the external audit looking at how we operate, and one of those was around the budget and how we present budget decisions to members of the public. I can't remember the exact wording the auditor used, but I do wonder if we could publish some of these in more layman terms with graphs, you know, just stuff that's easy to understand, just to, and send that through the comms teams, just to sort of, you know, have a way for the general public to see how these things sort of work in a more digestible way, just add a bit more openness, transparency to the budgeting process.
I'm sure that can be looked at.
Yeah.
It might be that's already happening from those recommendations, but
That's fair. I'll have to second the report. All those in favour? The next item is the Treasury Management 2023-24 quarter for monthly report.
So quarter four lays out the balances at the end of 23-24 that were invested and what was borrowed. We repaid £1 million of PWLB money, and we were investing £31 million at the end of the year. Point 11 will show you the split of the types of body that these were invested in, and point 12 shows the split of the interest rates that we were gaining at this point. It should be noted that during last year we made over £2 million on investment income. We profited really from holding a lot of government funds before spend and before return to them, and obviously from the high levels of interest rate during that year. Councillors will no doubt know the base rate has been dropped today by 0.25 basis points. We have, thankfully, knowing this would probably happen, although not this soon, we've invested quite long in the levels of cash balance that we have. We've invested as long as we feel is possible, given the large capital works that we have going forward, which should see us get the best interest that we can before those rates start to come into play with our new investments. Any questions?
Thank you, Councillor.
Chair, I'm happy to move the report. At the council audit, we had the advantage of the quarter one monitoring report as well, which showed that we've got an extra 3 million invested. Again, you know, as Chairman Louise says, you know, for as long as possible. And I wonder, just a technical question, given that the report went to accounts and audit, is there any reason why it didn't come here as well?
Could I ask the question?
Well, it wasn't on the
Nobody asked me
agenda.
to send it, so it's not been, it usually isn't presented because we're doing the outturn. So we're presenting financial outturn for the year gone. So we don't usually get involved in the current year, but if that's something that would be more appropriate at this point, perhaps. Or we're happy to bring it to the next executive.
Chair, I know what the numbers are. I'm happy, but other colleagues do not. So
That's very good. Thank you. I'll second the report. All those in favour? So, all the time.
move it.
Thank you. Second that.
Second.
Thank you very much, everyone. And good night.